Hello, everybody. Adam and Rob here with you again with the Fantasy Formula Live ahead of the Formula One MSC Cruises Gran Premio del Made in Italy e dell'Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. Rob, I've been practicing that.
Well, you've aced it because I certainly would not be able to do that, Adam. I just call it Imola and go from there. How are you?
Nervous. This is the first time I've been nervous about my lineup in a very long time. I'm already starting to see the lineups filling in for us to review, and there's such a spread. And I think even among our peers and the fantasy analysts, there's so much disagreement on which lineup is going to be best for this race.
Yeah, 100%. I am the most uncertain I've been for a decision this season, and I think that's an incredibly good sign for the game. There's been so much variety of lineups and DRS boost options and constructors, so I don't think I'll probably, knowing how fantasy goes, end up making the right choice this weekend, but I just hope by the end of the stream I've landed on ultimately what I move forward with for this week, and then can maybe, if it becomes such a problem, wildcard in Monaco.
You're going to see the anxiety build on stream in the next 45 minutes. We've got Terry coming in soon to talk about the many technical things this weekend. We have tons of upgrades, changes to the track layout, and we've seen all of the expansion of the gravel trap eat some of these cars alive in the free practice sessions. I have a lot of questions for him about that Fernando Alonso shunt in FP3 and what that means for his readiness for qualifying. And then hopefully one last sim from F1 Fantasy Tools that we can all unpack together. Hello to some of you coming in through the chat. Hi, Mike. Hi, Luke. Hi, Clyde. Looks like we got a good group building already. Rob, perhaps we can build up some of the information we learned from Free Practice 3 and just walk through some of the early findings from it.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a great way to kick things off. I think the biggest takeaway for just about all of us through three practice sessions is Ferrari's pretty much kind of monopoly over all three sessions. Even though Carlos and Charles weren't on top of FP3, I think it's still a very encouraging sign for the Scuderia at a home race. So I think for most people, there's going to be some coverage of Ferrari in their teams this week. How much, I'm curious to see what we unpack on the stream, but I think the upgrades look to have worked, and I think McLaren's package is continuing to deliver as well.
I think a lot of our lineups that we're going to review later in the show have heavy coverage of McLaren and Ferrari, some going as heavy as triple McLaren or triple Ferrari. And so one of the big topics over this hour is going to be what happened to Red Bull this weekend. Yesterday in free practice, Max was definitely upset with the performance of the car, not a lot of compliance, particularly on the soft tires, and so he was lower on the timing sheet. I would argue that in FP3 was a little bit of bad luck there. Max was running on the mediums, and the car was definitely more compliant in the session. I rode along with him on F1 TV for most of free practice 3, and he seemed pretty happy. But it was when, at the end of the session, he was preparing for a flying lap, his teammate Sergio Perez put it into the wall to red flag the session. So I don't necessarily think Max's P6 in FP3 is indicative that he's totally fallen off, and that's driving my thought of potentially keeping him on my team. So it'll be interesting to see if the new sims or if any of you in the chat can talk me out of that.
Yeah, it's a tough one because let's start from the beginning, from Friday morning our time. You know, Max was P5. Even Checo had to wood on him by a couple of hundredths, and then, as I said before, Ferrari were at the top, and that very much continued into FP2. I mean, going back to FP1 just quickly, Lando and Oscar, and I feel like FP1's usually the hardest to gauge in terms of ultimate car performance, just because they try so many different things. We also saw Behrman running for Haas in FP1, and then a lot of flow viz through yesterday as well. And then you're moving into FP2, and I think you then start to see a bit more of the truths of how cars are performing shake out. A couple of people had run-ins with the gravel on track as well, and I think we'll probably cover that off with Terry. But most importantly to me, Charles Leclerc, who I had one eye on since the conclusion of Miami as a DRS boost option for Imola, and the talk of those big upgrades coming through really shone through there as well. So I was very encouraged by that. Yuki Tsunoda was probably my surprise package of yesterday's practice, though.
Absolutely. Yuki finishing P6 and FP1, P3 and FP2. So really incredible pace out of the RB that week. And also, I want to go back to a point you made earlier. We saw Ali Behrman in FP1 replacing Magnussen. The reason why he didn't replace Hulkenberg, this is outrageous. Hulkenberg has never, in his 18 years of single-seater racing, raced at Imola. So he needed the experience, which is, it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out this weekend.
I heard about that. I think it was I can't remember if it was the weekend warm up or one of the free practice sessions. They were talking about this, and it's so fascinating that one of the most experienced drivers on the grid has never raced a car here. But I guess we've maybe overblown it a little bit. I'm certainly a product of maybe speaking that into the atmosphere too much. But with the simulation of simulators that drivers have these days, and so many extra prep work that they can do, I maybe am not sure I should be too discouraged by a driver not having driven at a track, because we've seen Oscar Piastri drive excellently at circuits he's not previously raced at before either.
It's a great point. Yeah, just not having experience doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a tough weekend.
Yeah.
That Haas has looked really great all season too, so I don't have any doubts in Hulkenberg.
Is there anything else we want to cover off in the free practice time? I know we've got 55 minutes and my team is no closer to being decided. I think we've also got quite a number of lineups in our FanAmp base that we're going to be looking at. So if you haven't already done that and you want your team reviewed, throw that in our FanAmp base and we'll bring it up on screen later in the show. But Adam, I'm happy to defer to you if there's anything in particular you want to cover off before we...
Only one last thing on the FP3 timings is I went back and watched what was happening immediately before the Perez crash, and that was where Piastri and Russell logged their flying laps. So I don't necessarily think, for those of you even considering a Mercedes this weekend, I don't think that's the product of anything other than very good timing. And I would also slightly dilute Oscar being P1 ahead of the Ferraris. I think the Ferraris, like you said, Rob, still have pace, and that's borne out through some of the quali and race simulations from F1.com, what I'm seeing from betting lines, and what we're seeing through the rider sims on F1 fantasy tools. Yeah. So for me, Ferrari has the edge over McLaren.
I think as well, Tom Popman in the chat made a great point, is not necessarily how much Red Bull look off the pace, but rather just how good McLaren and Ferrari look so far. And that's kind of the biggest conundrum I'm faced with for my team this week. Is I'm pretty set on bringing in Charles Leclerc, but do I go one step further and also bring in McLaren constructor over Red Bull? It's hard at the moment for me to provide a definitive answer, but I've seen a lot of papaya on draft lineups on Twitter, etc., and on Reddit that make me think that there's quite a few people converging in that direction. And if it turns out to be a good weekend for them, I fully expect that could continue into Monaco as well.
I have two thoughts on that. One is, this is probably one of the last good weeks to run McLaren, because you have both Lando and the McLaren constructor above 24 million. So if they live up to that potential, get the $1 million price increase, that puts them into price tier A. And that means if they're not contending for race wins, they're basically dead to us in F1 fantasy. So if you believe in McLaren, this is maybe the last week to run them. And then also, one of the things that haunts me as I think about really shaking up drivers and constructors is Monaco's coming up next week. So if you have to unpeel all of that to get back into a Red Bull build, it could be pretty messy if you're taking a minus 10 2 straight weeks just to get in and out of McLaren Ferrari setup.
Yeah, 100%. And I've thought about using the wildcard next week for that exact reason if I do go down the McLaren route. The guys in the chat have mentioned, and I got a notification just come through on my phone as well, that the new sims are up on F1 Fantasy Tools. So why don't we take a look at that and dive into all that good stuff right away?
Let's do it. You might need to click on one of your teams or throw in a budget, Rob, because I think it defaults to 100.
Yeah, it does.
And we've all spammed the site so quickly, I can't even get it to load on my end.
Yeah, let's I hope it doesn't crash the website. But I think 110 is probably a fair mark. I mean, we could go 108, we could go 112, because we were looking at different lineups earlier in the week. But if it wants to give itself some time to think, I think this is what's really interesting to me, is kind of how the teams are weighted currently for who looks the pick of the bunch.
Yeah, so I can tell you, just scrolling down to the driver rankings, it now has Norris at the top of the pile for points, ahead of even Max. Norris, Verstappen, Leclerc, Sainz. So for those of you that had disagreed with the FP2 sims where Sainz was ahead of Leclerc, it looks like that script is flipped a bit.
Yeah.
And then a pretty healthy drop for Fernando Alonso, right to the bottom of the top 10 there.
Yeah, I think it's a fair. I don't disagree with this. I maybe would have expected Max to be just slightly higher, but again, not really worth owning for this weekend, in my opinion. Again, I think there might be some, yourself included, that wants to speak on his behalf as a good fantasy asset. But the one thing that I've pointed out, driver of the day has gone to a McLaren or Ferrari driver in, I think, 14 of the last 15 races. And then I think Oscar picked up the fastest lap, although that was probably not a product of how quick the car was in Miami. So it's fairly wide open. What's your kind of gut feel on the top drivers for this week, and what looks like the standout choices, a kind of a DRS boost pick?
So for me, obviously, I still like Max because I think there's still some pace that he hasn't extracted from that Red Bull yet. He was so happy in FP3 compared to Friday. I think they're holding back on a little something, which is driving why I lean toward him. For those of you that want to go with a more cost cap build, I would say, in light of what we're seeing here, Norris first and then Leclerc second. Norris is such a magnet for driver of the day, led the category last season. He's on two already this year. So I think he would be a good choice. He's also had 3 straight podiums. This would be his 3rd straight podium of the season, 3rd straight podium at Imola. So very comfortable with the circuit, very comfortable with his upgraded McLaren. So a lot of good momentum for Lando.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I think as a biased Ferrari fan, I'm probably going to say Leclerc might just edge him, but I think it's going to be pretty close. And then I've probably got Sainz and Piastri, the next picks. I mean, excluding Verstappen from the obvious, just given his price doesn't seem to stack up on these non-sprint weekends. Do we want to quickly cover off a few questions in the chat? Because I know we're bringing in Terry soon as well.
Let's do it. I was so busy following along on your screen, I didn't see too many questions come in yet. Let's see. Clyde asks, would you go for a -10 hit and go for the budget upside, swapping out Red Bull for McLaren and then use the wild card of Monaco, or another -10 hit to bring back the Red Bull and Max side lineup? So it'd be two -10s or a -10 and a wild card to try to get that budget boost from McLaren.
I think you could easily justify a -10 if you're confident Red Bull are off the pace, in my opinion. Just because of how many points the constructor can score. The one thing I will say is that it's very hard for me right now to completely bin off Red Bull just because of those fast pit stops points. It's gonna keep them in the fight regardless of how slow Perez and Max are over the weekend. And I mean, slow for them is still kind of top 6, top 7. So I think if you say, like you did before, Max has one of those otherworldly drives where he qualifies pretty poorly and somehow unlocks more performance over the race, then maybe there's something to be said for that. But I think for me, I'm very much thinking about a wild card. I don't know if I've really answered Clyde's question, but what do you think?
This is where I think you and I disagree a little bit. I think even with Perez lacking, putting both drivers into Q3 and the pit stop potential means Red Bull are probably in a pretty good spot this weekend. Maybe they'll score slightly fewer points than McLaren, but remember, Lando's driver of the day doesn't hit the constructor. It would only be a fastest lap, which if Red Bull are out of the top 2 or 3, they're going to steal on their own. So I think constructor-wise, Red Bull and McLaren will be fairly tight, even with Perez probably hanging toward the bottom of the top 10.
Yeah. Okay.
And then, Seth has a similar question. Seth's already used his wild card chip. Deciding between triple Ferrari, triple McLaren, which one would you go with between those two? I think you and I both agree. Triple Ferrari slightly has the edge there.
Yeah, I'd say it's quite close. But Ferrari have also scored, I think, something like 30 odd pit stop points this year too. So, McLaren do have, we know how good they can be in the pit stops. I think they've had some of the fastest pit stops of all time. But I'm kind of going for a known commodity over Ferrari and what we've seen so far than McLaren. But it is close. So flip a coin if you don't think what we're saying is enough.
Good.
Fowen has said, my situation is Leclerc, Red Bull, Ferrari. I wanted to finally buy Max. So Max transfer in my squad now. I think the answer for me is hold for at least one more week and go with a Ferrari lineup now that you've kind of seen on practice how good Ferrari are. But again, yeah, we'll happily
This
be
is where
guided
me
by
being right on the fence can go both ways. If you have Max already, I'm very slightly leaning toward holding Max. If you can just afford Max but have previously run a budget build, I would say slightly leaning toward holding onto your budget build with a Leclerc or Norris 2X driver. That's how close a lot of this is. Rob, do you want to head over? We got 5 minutes until Terry and a lot of lineups to review. Maybe we can
we do rush through, do a quick
Yeah.
fire, 5 minutes. Yeah. Can you see that? Do you want me to zoom in a little bit?
Let's see.
There we
I
go.
could see, so I have it open on my screen.
Okay.
And feel free, chat, to let us know if you can't see it in detail on your screen. So we've got just an incident here. One of my favorite Charles quotes. It's Leclerc, Stroll, Gasly, Hulkenberg, Sargent. It's interesting. For the first time all season, I heard Sam Collins talking F1 Fantasy in the lead up to FP3, and he loves these Aston Martin upgrades, particularly in that front wing and the nose and what that could mean for Lance. Obviously, he was a letdown last week. He got caught up in that DNF, dropped some positions in the Grand Prix. But he is due. He's still one of the best drivers in Tier C if you want that price boost. I don't hate this lineup.
No, I don't either. I think there's not much you can do with 2 transfers this weekend, and I think he's got all of the major bases covered in Leclerc, Red Bull, and Ferrari, I think. So if you've got Stroll and Hulkenberg are probably 2 of the best 3 midfield / back marker drivers for me. So no to the other one. So yeah, I really like it. Sargent's probably a little bit of a risk. A lot talked around, his possible lost seat for next year. So I did mention, I think, I can't remember if it was you or somewhere else, that he might push beyond his capabilities given his seat is at risk and maybe end up in the gravel. So just monitor that situation carefully.
Yeah, if you're risk adverse, the play then would be Stroll and Sargent out for 2 drivers in the 9-ish million range, like an Albon and a Magnussen or something.
Yeah.
But I think Stroll Sargent has the higher upside for points and cost cap game if you're feeling a little risky.
Yeah.
Mastivos, look at this. We got 6 options. All right, the 3 on the top are Red Bull, Ferrari. The 3 on the bottom are McLaren and Ferrari. And so it's team 1, 2, and 3 current state, and then team 1, 2, and 3 future state. So it looks like a full-scale shift from Red Bull into McLaren. And you can see some of these options here. Team 1 is a triple Ferrari. Team 2 is a Lando Sainz, McLaren, Ferrari. Just a lot of creative builds there.
Yeah, I like all of them, to be honest. You kind of, I mean, I don't know if he wants us to critique every single one, but I think you're covering all of the major bases. I guess the Red Bull constructor is the one glaring thing missing from all of those. But if, again, you're confident Perez has an absolute stinker, then why not go for a team sans Red Bull?
As I look at the current state 3 teams, anybody who has Perez as a 2X driver, I think that's the only one we all agree, get him out of there. Pretty much anybody at the top of the field is a better pick than Perez. So I like what you've done with Team 1. I would just caution with Team 1 and Team 3, if Red Bull are back for Monaco, this is going to be tough to dig out of. So that's why I like Team 2 the best. You get that coverage of McLaren and Ferrari with Max, and then with 1 or 2 moves, you can still pivot back to Red Bull if they're back on, which you'd have to expect at this point.
I think we're aligned. All right. Next team is from, sorry, I've zoomed in and out to Tony FJ40. Okay, let's try and piece this together.
All right.
I think
By the way, great context everyone's giving us this week. Putting some little notes here so we don't get lost among these teams. Very nice.
Yeah. So it looks like 3 different options to move into from his current team on the top left. I think role transfer and drop Magnussen. I'm probably leaning towards. I don't know.
This is where the disagreements could start coming out, because I really like going from across the top, going from that current team, moving into Gasly, rolling a transfer. I like really good coverage across the bottom drivers. He's got a little bit more budget than I do. Otherwise, I'd do this. But I think a lot of you are trying to get more coverage, maybe in the bottom right-hand corner, that triple Ferrari build. In light of what we've seen from Aston Martin, I would avoid that bottom left.
Agreed.
I get it. They're in Tier C. They could get 1.5 million in increase. We don't even know if Alonso's going to be ready for Q1. So I would shy away from the Aston Martin constructor.
Yeah, I personally am not so sure if the bottom left one is my go-to at all. But I actually really like the bottom right, even if for a -10. So it's probably my pick of the three. Okay, we'll do one or two more quickly. I know we've got a few to get through too, and then we'll bring in the great man.
All right. This next one is from Faint. I see a lot of Haas.
Yeah, and I don't see a lot of... no, I mean, my team's probably going to look quite similar to this. So
I think the thing that my eyes go to first is that the current and option 1 have Perez. We got to get out of Perez, whatever it takes to do that. I do like both of these. Oh, so option 2 and option 3 are Perez to Leclerc, and then which Alpine driver you like best?
I think for me, I like Gasly over Ocon, not just because of his recent form fantasy-wise, seems to have edged his teammate, but I also don't mind having a little bit of extra money to spare in case when we get to next week, there's another shift in the template or meta lineup, and you don't want to be kind of hamstrung by a driver like Ocon, who's preventing you from going into a preferred lineup without that extra transfer up your sleeve, or sorry, not extra transfer. It just prevents you from making that transfer without having to take a -10 if Ocon's the one inhibiting that move. So I like the bottom right of the three.
Me too. And I really like that you have coverage of 4 good midfield drivers. We talked about Tsunoda earlier. He's looked great all weekend so far. You could get budget games from a lot of these guys this weekend. So great team. Rob, maybe do one more here. We'll bring in Terry.
Yep, great idea.
I like this. This is my Lewis Hamilton fandom summed up in one handle. Merc to Ferrari 2025.
I think for me, I'm not so sure about Alonso. Is his car going to be ready? Does anyone have an update on that? Because I have not paid any attention to Twitter in the last kind of half an hour or so.
Terry's going to get an earful from me in the next 2 minutes about this question. So I get it. The team on the right was the FP2 F1 Fantasy Tools sim, one of the top picks for my budget, a Sainz Alonso build. That crash has me totally spooked. And I kind of like the team that's on the left. Again, like the last build, solid midfield drivers, a lot of confidence in Leclerc.
Nice. Alrighty, I think that should do it for now. We've got, Jesus, we're right 38 minutes until the deadline. I still haven't decided on a team, so let's get Terry and hopefully this helps.
Yes. Terry, welcome back to the show. You've been a very busy man this week, authoring a great piece on the FanAmp website about Adrian Newey, the Tech Corner where you broke down the many upgrades that have come in this weekend, of course, with the Full Beans podcast and your daily news updates. How do you have the time for it all?
I've been struggling this weekend. Lots of coffee as always.
Fantastic. True to your brand, for sure. I want to get right into this Fernando Alonso crash. We saw him hit the wall in a way that both the upgraded front wing and potentially the bits at the back of the car, the diffusers new. They talked about potentially needing a new gearbox. How difficult is this fix going to be for Aston Martin, and how are you hearing anything about his readiness for Q1?
I believe he will be ready, but it depends what's on the car. So they look like they're replacing the gearbox. They had a new one ready as it was coming back into the pits. That could just be a precaution, obviously, but it looks like they're going to change over. But it all depends what spare parts they've got of the new parts that they brought with them. So that's going to be the big factor, is whether or not they have to switch to an older setup or whether or not they can actually use the upgraded parts on Fernando's car. Depends how much spare they've got. They haven't said yet which is the option. So he might have to go to default setting from Miami.
You bring up a really great point. Even if the car is okay for Q1, you might have to revert back to the Miami spec. Have you lost some of the benefits, the performance upgrades of the nose? This is this thing that Sam Collins talked about in such great detail in the lead up to FP3 as a benefit for them this weekend. So something to watch carefully. And that covers off Liam's question in the chat of, do you think Alonso's car is fine? I trust Terry a lot more than my own intuition. So he says, It will be ready, but will it have the upgraded feet?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure what car we will get, but Fernando will have a car for qualifying.
Okay.
Fantastic.
That's really good. It looks like there's a few different questions around that in the chat. The other thing I'm really curious to get your take on, Terry, is obviously, and I think we talked about this offline separately, and I think you also covered it in your article this week too, around the gravel traps and the new circuit layout at Imola, kind of what that could mean for potential carnage or driver error on track, and whether or not we should really think about that for those higher risk drivers.
Definitely. I mean, there has been lots of changes. Double curbs installed. I mean, the race director's notes has got literally 10, 15 different changes on the track, ranging from double curbs to gravel traps to extending. It looks like it's a little less unforgiving in places, I'd say, from what we're seeing in free practice. So when they push, there seems to be a general, we saw with Fernando that actually there's not that little bit of grip that there might have been there, or that little bit of runoff that might have been there before previously. I don't know how updated the sims are, going back to what Rob was saying about obviously Hulkenberg being in the sim. I'm not sure if the sims would have been updated enough to take into account the changes that were made with the double curbs and the runoff areas. So I think that might be why we're seeing just being caught out a bit from some of the drivers, that they haven't been able to update the sims in time with what the changes were made.
It's been very interesting watching these first few sessions because nobody's been safe. A lot of our top fantasy options found themselves struggling with the expanded gravel traps. Terry, I want to ask you a bit about Red Bull, because we saw Max struggling all through Friday, doing okay in FP3, although he never ran Sauce, which is the tire he struggled with on Friday. Meanwhile, the race sims from F1.com have Red Bull at the top of the timing charts. What do you make of what you've seen from Red Bull so far, and are they just hiding in the shadows, ready to unleash this weekend?
I'm going to disagree with Fancy Tools, and I'm going to stay with Max, because he was 0.8 off on the mediums. You've got 0.5 to 0.8 with a difference in compound tyres. He didn't run a hot lap. He was much more happier with that setup. He was running long data anyway. There's a rear wing change that came to Red Bull this morning from yesterday. So they changed the rear wing out as part of their setup. They had Jake Dennis in the sim all night running through different setups. So I'm pretty confident that Red Bull, if they don't qualify for pole, will certainly race pace be in it again. I don't think they're if you look at 0.8 to what he was before that hot lap, he's in amongst it anyway. So I'm expecting that maybe we might see a Ferrari or McLaren pole with Max starting a bit lower down. But I think when we come to the race smart, we're going to see the Red Bull race pace just kick back in. They've tweaked the downforce. They've obviously negotiated a bit of top speed in exchange for that. They've got the updates on the car. They might have reverted back. So I think they're going to be fine. I think it's a bit doom and gloom from some parties still, and I'm not too keen to jump off Max yet.
That's
very validating, Terry. Thank you.
That's interesting. I think that's probably enough for me to stick with the Red Bull constructor for one more week, but I think I'm pretty much set on moving away from Max. So I think, Adam, this could be the first time we disagree on a possible DRS boost option this year.
Good. Make for some parity. And Terry, I have a follow-up question I think that could be related to what we see on Sunday. Since the last time we actually raced at Imola, Pirelli are bringing one step softer compounded tires. They're running the softest in the line. They attempted to bring this last year, but with the race washed out, we never saw how it played out. Do you think we're going to see more differential between the tire strategies that could, shake up some of that grid order between this afternoon and tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, this is a deliberate ploy by Pirelli to try and force a strategy change. So Imola is a one-stop track because you lose 27 seconds when the longest pit stops. So you don't want to do more than one stop if you can help it. So what they've done is introduce the softest compound to try and force this strategy. Whether or not it will work or not, I'm not too sure. I think the tyres might be okay, but they might opt for somebody to do a gamble. Obviously, safety car, you got 90%, above 90% safety car in Imola, 30% virtual safety car. That will obviously mess with the strategy a bit as well. I think weather we're going to be okay. I'm not seeing a lot of weather forecasts for rain during the race itself, so I think it's looking like it's going to be a dry race, even if we get some showers before, or even maybe a bit during, but it's not looking highly like it's going to be a washout or anything like that. So I think a safety car might play a part. If you get an early safety car, I think that will see a strategy change and go out the window a bit. But we might see some teams holding on for a safety car with such a high probability. So it depends if tyres hold up. We're not seeing enough running on on the tyres at the moment with the red flags we've had as well, which didn't help.
Interesting. I think there was a question in the chat around Mercedes upgrades, Terry. I know Adam and I talked about it briefly, and it's probably not enough to shake the fantasy tree this weekend, but do you think that's a sign for anything moving forward, or have they still not quite got their car figured out?
I think it looks better, but then in true Mercedes fashion, as I'm sure Adam realised, they look better yesterday than today. George's lap was very much a victim of being in the right place, right time. I think that they're still way off those sort of Ferrari, McLaren, and Red Bull, but I think they're probably better than Aston Martin this weekend from what I'm seeing so far with how Aston Martin reacted to the updates on their car. So I'd say Mercedes in Imola will probably be a better bet if someone's toying between Aston Martin and Mercedes, but it's not enough to make me think that you should put them in terms of a Ferrari, McLaren, or Red Bull unless a safety car or an accident puts them in that position. But I just think that they look more comfortable, but it's still not enough to break the top and get towards podiums. Not yet for them.
Got it. Terry, I want to ask you our contest question because I didn't even mention it at the top of the show. You have the chance to win another great prize from Fifth Gear Garms. I'm wearing my Lewis shirt this week to try to get some good vibes into that car. Do you think Lando will earn his third straight podium of the season and his third straight podium at Imola this weekend?
I do, but I don't think he'll be on top.
Fantastic. There was a really good article from F1.com earlier this week about how drivers followed up their first F1 win. Max's first was followed up by a DNF, interestingly. So it'll be interesting to see how Lando's encore looks.
That's interesting.
That is interesting.
Terry, I'm dying to know too. You had mentioned to me off air that you were toying around with your fantasy team and accidentally hit the save button. Where did you land?
Don't even go there. That'll be a warning to all these people not to juggle childcare and updating your fantasy Formula team. So I've now got Max Hulkenberg, I've got Ferrari and Red Bull, and I'm locked in with Valtteri, Logan, and Pierre Gasly.
That's not the worst team in the world, though. You didn't lock in like the Williams constructor and
No. It was a genuine messing. Yeah, it was a genuine messing about to see what I could afford. So it wasn't. I've had worse. Let's be honest, but it's probably not my optimum lineup. But do you know what? We'll see how we go. It's going to be different. It might work for me.
Fantastic. I like it. It's a differential strategy. If anybody asks you, Terry, you're just trying to make some moves.
Yeah, just following the data, it's fine. I've got good Alpine vibes, and Logan's going to come good because he needs a seat.
It's a good point. A desperation week for Logan. He has to show up. I mean, this is the most negatively James Vallis has ever spoken about the future of his seat. I think he sees the forest through the trees on this petition to get Kimi Antonelli in a seat sooner.
There was also talk of Valtteri having a 15-minute meeting in the Williams Hospo suite this morning. So yes. I wonder if that's a sign of anything to come.
A return to Williams for Valtteri.
Yeah.
Well, he's obviously worked with James and obviously worked with Williams. So, and I think Valtteri was very honest about talking to 3 or 4 teams. I think he knows that it's on its Sauber is probably coming to an end at the end of this season. So, I feel that while we talk driver market, it would be Hassel Williams for Valtteri if he was going to go anywhere. So it makes sense that he's having a conversation, and it would make sense for Williams to have that conversation. It's a strong lineup that would be.
Yeah, I agree.
Valtteri's worked with a lot of great minds in the sport, but he's never worked with Adrian Newey before. And I highly encourage everybody to check out on the FanAmp website Terry's latest article on where he thinks Adrian Newey is going to go. It's a must-read history on his career in Formula One and why Terry thinks there's a dark horse that could potentially snatch him up.
Absolutely. I don't think it's as clear-cut as what everyone's saying. But I would say he has signed for somebody this week from what I'm hearing.
Interesting. Terry, any final thoughts before we jump back into our many lineup questions?
No, I think we've covered lots of things. Like I say, I think it is going to be close at the top. I don't think there's a clear cut. I think Red Bull have done enough to put themselves back into contention, but I certainly don't think they're a dominant force around here. And I think traffic is going to be huge in qualifying. I think you need to get an early lap. You need to bank it, otherwise you might be in trouble with a red flag. I know the clock obviously stops for qualifying, but we've seen a lot of traffic problems around here. We saw obviously we got a sneak peek, didn't we, in free practice 3 of what I feel qualifying is going to be like at the end of qualifying today. So I think those teams that get an early lap in and get it banked in without track limits deleting it is going to be key to actually get in a good position here. And we know that qualifying is key around Imola because of the lack of overtaking opportunities. So even if, if you get Ferrari or McLaren on the front, even if the Red Bulls got better pace, it's not like a Miami 1 DRS zone. There's not a lot of opportunities for overtake here, really. So that might just be enough to hold off the challenge of a faster car behind you. That's for sure.
Excellent. Terry,
points.
thank you so much for your insight. Once again, I encourage everybody to check out Terry on F1 Coffee Corner through all of his socials, his work on the FanAmp website, and the Full Beans podcast. Enjoy the race, Terry.
Thanks for Terry.
Thank you. Good luck, everyone.
All right, Rob, let's go back to the chat. We got a lot of questions starting to pile up here. Jose asks, Sainz and Tsunoda, or Leclerc and Hulkenberg?
I'm trying to find my mark in the chat because there's been quite a bit that I think we could probably knock out.
I'm at the timestamp of 9:14 a.m.
Okay. Why don't we do some real quick fire questions? Like we just ask the question and one of us give the answer and then go to the next one.
Sainz and Tsunoda versus Leclerc and Hulk.
I think Sainz and Tsunoda, but I think it's close. I think Tsunoda's probably got a bit more budget upside and probably a higher point ceiling this weekend. And I'd say the difference between Leclerc and Sainz is negligible. So I'm leaning for the first option.
Same. Felix agrees in the chat as well.
Yep,
Sainz and
nice.
Tsunoda.
Question from Jeremy, a wild card now and -10 in Monaco if I need Red Bull back. I think that's fine. And I'm honestly, since Terry came on, I'm half entertaining the wild card. So I'm rubber banding between ideas right now. It's kind of a hard decision. Anyway.
Alligator in the chat says Max and Sargent or Leclerc and Magnussen.
Leclerc, you say Max, Sargent, Leclerc, Magnussen? I'm probably going Leclerc and Magnussen.
I'd say it's a toss-up for me. I think leaning toward Leclerc in that situation, just because I still am not sure about Sargent with all that gravel.
No.
You got to imagine Magnussen's going to take it easy, right? 2 penalty points, he's missing a race. So
yeah,
I think Mag will play it safe.
I agree.
So Jeffrey wants to know exactly your thought process, Rob. Pros and cons of wildcarding now versus for Monaco.
That's half the reason why I've thought about doing it this week, because I'm fully expecting a price bump for McLaren and Ferrari that's going to be substantially more than Red Bull and Max. And so I'm thinking, do I potentially just use the chip now? And if I have to take a -10 in Monaco, I do. But I'm also conscious that Max's point ceiling is not going to be as high on a non-sprint weekend. Sure, he might qualify P1 in Monaco and stay P1, but Leclerc's an excellent qualifier. Sainz and Norris are also excellent. So I think I'm leaning towards the wild card now. But again, I'm not 100% sure of it. And then, take a -10 for Red Bull next week if I really have to.
I'll tell you, a hidden pro of wild carding now is if there ever was a race where the final fix was in play to give you an extra lineup change, it's Monaco. You think about the number of overtakes, lowest on the grid, the situation with Esteban Ocon 2 years ago. You have someone that qualifies a little bit high. There's not a lot of changes in the race. One driver crashes out. You could have a freak Grand Prix win for somebody. So I would recommend, if you're in between this week or next week and moving those pieces around a lot to Ford, Ferrari, and McLaren, wild card now, and then either take the points hit or 2 transfers plus final fix to get out of it for Monaco.
Yep.
All right. Benji with some really kind words in the chat. Thank you very much, Benji. I appreciate that you've been watching all of our shows and are enjoying them. Big Man wants to know McLaren or Ferrari this week. I'm thinking Ferrari. It's a close one.
Yeah, Ferrari. I think so too, but it's a close one. Dave, shout out to Dave, who I met in Miami. Are you guys leaning Max or a different team?
Different. It's different. I'm leaning Max, and Rob is leaning toward different.
Yeah. I'm probably leaning a Leclerc or a Norris at the moment.
Wonderful. We're catching some flack from the FanAmp team in the chat because we called Terry the great man. He is a great man.
He is a great man. Alligator asked, should I swap Max for Leclerc so I have budget? I think we've answered that. Yes, lean towards a non-max DRS boost if you can avoid Sargent.
Ian wants to know, would you pick Stroll or Sonoda?
Oh, that's a tough one, but I think Sonoda for me it's close though. It's really close.
I'm going to say a prayer and go with Stroll.
Okay.
Still, I think those Aston Martin upgrades could get him at the bottom of the top 10. I think whichever one of those doesn't make the top 10 is going to struggle to get any overtakes. This is typically a rainy course, so it's hard to look at historical overtake numbers, but it's usually among the bottom. These last two races, we've had very long start-finish straights where a lot of the overtaking happens. Not so much at Imola. So I'm not really counting on a ton of overtakes from drivers that don't qualify high. So hoping Stroll breaks his streak, qualifies high, gets you a few more points.
That's fair. Gasly over Sonoda. I'm not sure if I'd go that far. I think Sonoda's my pick.
Agreed. And I think this question comes in because the latest sim has Gasly and Sonoda 0.1 points apart from each other. I think this one I've just got to go with my eyes and stick with Sonoda.
Yeah. I really need to lock in my team, Adam, and I'm currently.
Yeah, do you want to have a moment, Rob? Because I am going to go boring. I think I'm almost ready to lock in my team, so I can cover off some questions in the chat and give you some time to just absorb everything.
I mean, maybe cover off a couple more questions. I'm not sure if I'm going limitless. Sorry, not limitless, wildcard or not. It's probably okay where I'm at right now to give people watching context. Why don't I quickly bring it on screen just to give you guys a visual. So this is my team on the left. It's most likely going to be either Leclerc or Norris and Sonoda for 2 trades, which I feel like I'm leaving some money on the table, which is, or I go the whole hog and wild card in McLaren, Ferrari. So it's this, as I said at the start, it's the most indecisive I've been, and I'm still no closer to a decision now than I was 45 minutes ago. So I think my team would look something like this, and then I have to stick with. Yeah, it would look something like this if I went the wildcard route.
And then what would you do for Monaco?
That's the thing. It kind of hamstrings me. So I'd probably stick. That's why I'm probably like 70% Leclerc and Sonoda in for Max and Sargent, and then think about making the wildcard move then. Or what's the race after Monaco? It's Spain.
Canada.
No, Canada. Yeah. So anyway, that's where my team's at right now. Again, Charles and Lando is pretty close in my eyes, closer than what the Sims say, but we'll have to wait and see. Okay, let's knock out a few more questions in the chat. Do we have to cover off some lineups? We probably should actually.
Let's go back to the lineups. You can see me looking down. I'm just now hammering out my lineup block post, and we can talk about that in just a moment.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll look at these then. We've got a lineup from Ty Fox. I really like the team on the left. I think the Ferrari coverage, triple Ferrari with a wild card. I mean, I was just looking at something quite similar to that, but you've got the budget to go without Albon, whereas I do not. So envious of that. Aston Martin's probably the one we've talked about as an avoid. And then I think the team on the right is one I'm running quite similar, but I have lots of spare budget after that. So not much I can do about that.
I think we disagree slightly on the order. I like 3, 1, 2 in that order.
Okay. Probably for the Red Bull coverage, I expect.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm strangely optimistic about Stroll. But not so optimistic I would double up with him in the middle lineup.
Cool. Well, I'll just quickly bring your team onto the screen here. This is what Adam's running for this weekend. So
I told you it would be boring. It's a full rollback of my Japan team. So I played Limitless in China. I reverted back to this for the start of the week. I just believe that there's still pace in that car from Max. We heard from Terry earlier that all the signs are pointing to Red Bull correcting some of the issues that afflicted Max on Friday. I don't have enough moves to really do anything significant here. I could pull out Albon and try to get a second Haas in with Sargent. I could do Gasly and Sargent. None of that made me feel warm and fuzzy compared to carrying a free transfer into Monaco and having 3 moves. I don't think the difference between my 2 transfer option and 10 points that I would save potentially by moving the team around next week makes a big difference. So I'm hopeful that the Monaco running order is different enough that I can deploy all 3 transfers in a way that gets me a differential.
Good point. Good point. Alrighty. Well, why don't we quickly knock out the remaining lineups now that we've covered off your team, and I'm going to agonize now over a -10 whether or not I go for the
Fantastic.
McLaren Ferrari.
We've got Sim on the pace next with a 4-pack of teams here. Team 1 looks like maybe the team that they had in a previous week with a few different flavors here. Ooh. I would probably lean toward Team 2, which I like more than totally upending your team for a -10 this week. And I really don't like what Alonso brings you compared to them in the last team. I think there's probably going to be some dissent with Rob in the chat, though, because that triple Ferrari build does look really tasty.
Triple. Sorry, am I looking at the lineup? You mean?
Oh, are we on different? Are we on different pages?
I was looking at. We were, yeah.
I was 1 slide past you. I must have looked over it. Sorry, I was looking at that one.
Okay. Yeah, I like them all, to be honest. Probably, yeah. I think one of the 2 on the right hand side is kind of my thought process for now. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Let's go back up to Beep where you were a moment ago. I think this is very close to the Rob conundrum, only it's Alonso with Leclerc. So I lean toward the team on the left. Rob, I think, is leaning toward the team on the right, possibly with a different second driver than Alonso.
Yes, something like that for sure. Okay.
Rob, do you need any time to lock in your lineup? I can cover us in the chat for a little bit. You could throw on the next lineups for. Oh, it's our friend Mike that's next. I can cover off Mike. Whatever works for you.
Yeah, let's do that. Sorry, I'm splitting my time between a lineup I still haven't landed on and
all right, Mike, I'll take the lead on reviewing your teams. Woo, look at all those options. So if you stick with the latest sims from F1 Fantasy Tools, I think that last team with Lando in the 2X spot is the pick. And they would even go so far as to lean into Team 2 with Lando as the 2X driver. I don't know if I'd go quite that far because it takes a fair bit of undoing, like I mentioned earlier. I think, yeah, my gut is saying that last team works the best. Lando with the highest likelihood of driver of the day. Love what we're seeing out of Sonoda. The 2 middle teams, you've got Sargent coverage. You can avoid all of that. Yeah, it really just comes down to Lando and Sonoda versus Leclerc and Stroll in the first lineup. I'm leaning toward that Lando team. It's probably the first Lando team I've really thrown my support behind. Good.
Yeah.
And I'll also, for anybody who's been following my battle with Laura Winter, we've had the same team for the last several races. I've talked to her this morning, and we are officially running different teams this week. So I'm excited to see that. But for anyone who wants a little intel as you form your lineup, she is keeping Max. So 2 of my most trusted sources of information are staying with Max.
Okay, interesting.
I never thought I'd run Max and be the differential play out of all of you, but I'm here for it.
I think you're in the minority this weekend. So let's see if he can pull off a masterstroke of a drive. I think he's got it in him for sure. I just wonder if it's, I don't know. You never know. It's just so open at the moment. So I think that's it's just so exciting.
Fantastic. All right, I'll go back over to the chat. Rob, how are you feeling about your team? Do you need another minute?
Yeah, I think I need another minute, but it's not certain.
All right. Yeah, Mike had asked gun to head, Norris or Leclerc. I think in a vacuum, Leclerc, but when you pair them the way you did, Mike, with Norris and Sonoda, I liked your team 4 a bit better. Do you think, Vitor asked in the chat, do you think that the price increase for Ferrari drivers is worth it, even though I think Max will take the win? It depends. Because in order for drivers in Tier B to get more than 0.1, 0.2 million more than Max, they have to do very well. Top 3 finish, either a fastest lap or driver in the day. So you've got to really be confident that the Ferrari drivers will do well. If they have a decent performance and Max wins the race, the difference will be maybe 0.1 million between them versus the points you lose from Max. Whew. The chat is as active as it's ever been, Rob. This is great.
Yeah, and I'm doing mental gymnastics over here trying to figure out what I'm doing. I just don't know what to pick. It's frustrating. I came in with the stream with, one eye on holding Red Bull constructor, and in the last 10 minutes my thought process has gone completely out the window. So lots of wild cards. Sorry, do you want me to go down to the last one, or are we
Let's do the last one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. Again, very similar flavors. The current team has Leclerc and Alonso. That's probably the only one I would rule out. And then if you're in between triple Ferrari or double Ferrari, double McLaren, I would go with that last team. I'm not super sure. Like Terry had mentioned earlier, I think Piastri's high time in FP3 was somewhat a product of when he timed the flying lap and not that he has race winning potential this weekend.
Fair. All right. I think I'm just gonna. I think I'm taking a -10. I'm like not. I think I'm like 90% sold on taking a -10, and yeah, I'm gonna go for my. Yeah, I want to use the wild card, but I might save it for one more week just in case.
Do you want to bring up? Do you have your lineup on screen? Do you want to?
Yeah.
Give us a big reveal.
Yeah, so this is a kind of where I'm at the moment. So it would be Max, Logan, and Red Bull out, and it would be Carlos, Oscar, and McLaren in for a -10. And then if things look completely out of pocket for Monaco, then I just wildcard Red Bull back into the team. But I also am not too concerned that realistically, I could potentially do this in 2 moves, maybe. Yeah, it's tough. I think I'm gonna land on that. No Red Bull. That's essentially where my head's at now. So
spicy, Rob. This is absolutely the most we've ever disagreed since we started the show.
Yeah, I agree. But I feel as though like this is the first kind of weekend where we're seeing an absolute shift in the template. And I guess the wild card is so important to obviously get to a lineup like this. So I think realistically, my thoughts are go for this. If it doesn't work out, then I wild card in Monaco. But it's also not a sprint weekend, so I don't think Max's delta to everyone else is going to be as much. So I suspect Sainz or someone would, Sainz would probably just stay for another week potentially.
And you bring up a good point. If this is the sign of things changing over in the grid order, this is the kind of move that will put you in the top 1,000 in the world. Those of you that jumped on McLaren early last year, between the budget gain and the points delta, you were clearly among the top in the world last year. And these are the kinds of bold moves that get you there.
Yeah. I mean, the other option, and actually Racing is Epic actually just mentioned what I was thinking about too, was do we keep Logan in here and then get rid of Albon? And that would have, I think, just enough, if I'm not mistaken, for Charles, and go triple Ferrari. And I think all of these assets, McLaren's just inside the B tier. All of these assets are going to go up, assuming they just do a decent race, get to the end of the race. So maybe I do that, but getting rid of Sargent is probably more of a priority. So
Rob, just a quick time check for you. It's 5 minutes until lineup lock. I just want to make sure you don't get caught out not hitting the submit button.
No. All right. I'm gonna lock it in. I'm gonna take a gamble, and I'm sure it'll hopefully pay off. So where were we? And Sainz would be my 2x for this weekend as well. So okay, locked in, -10. I think it's I think it's bold, but
I love it.
Yeah, confirmed live on stream for the first time this season. So let's go.
Get him, Rob. Rob,
Okay.
once you finalize that, can you throw the contest entries onto the spinning
Yes,
wheel?
sir.
I'll hammer through the chat. Joe says Sonoda or Magnussen. I vote Sonoda this week. Wesley says Yuki and McLaren or Sarge and Red Bull. Ugh. You've seen, I think just based on our team selections, we're on opposite sides of the fence. I think Red Bull through their pit stops and Max not being that bad, I lean toward the second half, but you just saw Rob Lock in the first half.
Hardest decision of the year. So I think it's fun, it's exciting, and that's kind of where my head's at. Should we get the contest out of the way?
Hit it.
Okay.
Ooh, it's J-Ho, a new winner. Congratulations to you. We'll be in touch to get you your gift card to Fifth Gear Garms. Looking forward to seeing what you pick up from there. I just got a hat from Fifth Gear Garms, and I'm trying to figure out if it looks weird on screen or not, and I might wear it on our show next week. I love how it fits, though. Love it. Rob, going back to the chat, David says, would it be worth it to switch out Bottas for Gasly for -10? I like Gasly this week for a number of reasons. I don't know if I like him 10 points worth of better. Rob is sharing with the world the decisions he's just made. Bottas for Gasly with a -10.
Bottas with Gasly. Hang on, where is this?
It's a 950 in the timestamps.
Oh,
from David.
Got it. No, I don't think so. Same. I don't think it's worth a -10 for any midfield driver. But
let's see if we can pump through a bunch of these in case some of you are still waiting to lock your lineups. Mag or Joe? I'm going to say Mag this time. I'm not confident in our overtake leaders on this circuit.
It's going to be hard to overtake. I think harder to overtake with these new gravel traps and such. But at the same time, it's it'll be interesting. I think Sargent is my biggest worry, and I just wanted to get rid of him for this week. So.
Confat says, should I go for Charles, Oscar, Ferrari, McLaren, take the -10? You just saw Rob do a very similar thing with Carlos, so you know his views on that now.
Yeah. Okay. All right. My tweet's live, and I think we're 3 minutes to lineup lock, so get those teams in, guys.
Rob, we missed a lineup from Sponge Kuhn, who says it in the chat. I just looked back now. They're in a no Red Bull league, so me and my Max nonsense doesn't apply here. The team is starting with Leclerc and Alonso and then moving into, I think we did talk about this one briefly. I like the triple Ferrari version of your team. The one that you suggest for Monaco, I actually like that now for this week.
Take out Logan. Yeah, I'm just terrified of Logan, no matter how good he's looked through this.
Rob, interesting question from Joel, and I don't know if you've given any thought of this. With a lineup like yours where you have multiple top driver options, did you consider the autopilot?
I did, but I think Ferrari are going to be slightly stronger. So that's why I'm leaning towards it currently. I'm sure there'll be another opportunity where I'm deliberating over two drivers like this one. So that's why I didn't feel compelled to use it this week. But I think it's very valid if you've got two Ferrari drivers. I mean, I probably could have gone Sainz and Leclerc, but
Rob, Kevin is looking for help in the last minute. Norris or Leclerc? We say Leclerc. F1 Fantasy Tool says Norris. So it's just all a matter of which experts you trust.
Yeah.
In this moment. Yep, Derpy Cake agrees. 50-50. Norris for the memes. Yes, agreed. Give me all the memes. Rob, any final thoughts before we go watch qualifying?
No, I don't think so. I think it's going to be a super interesting week for fantasy. A lot of interesting outcomes on the table and a lot of variety. As I think this is probably the most different we've agreed on fantasy lineups through the last year of doing this. So interesting to see how it shakes out.
Best of luck to all of you this weekend. I hope we all get some really high scores and have a lot to talk about on next week's show. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you soon.